How did you sneak in here? The words weren't shouted. They were whispered, as if her presence alone was something repulsive. A black woman, still wearing surgical gloves, her white coat stained with emergency blood, stood in the VIP hallway of a federal hospital. 3 minutes earlier, she had saved the life of a shot FBI agent during an emergency shift. 3 minutes later, a white security guard pointed at her and said, "Clean up. This area isn't for janitorial staff." She didn't say a word. No explanation. She simply removed her mask, revealing her name badge. Dr. Eden Monroe. Chief Executive, United States Covert Surgical Operations Center. And then, when the agent regained consciousness, the first name he called was hers. The last name he spoke, to demand someone be fired, belonged to the man who tried to throw her out of her own trauma room. "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be here. This is a secure wing." The sentence wasn't shouted. It was delivered with a calm, clipped professionalism, just enough civility to sound like protocol, just enough tone to sound like suspicion. Dr. Eden Monroe didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Much worse. She didn't answer either, not yet. The smell of gunpowder and adrenaline still lingered faintly in her nose, mixing with the sterile scent of ammonia and overused sanitizer. Her gloves were still on, blood-specked. Her surgical mask hung loose around her neck, her white coat slightly wrinkled from leaning over a body that had flatlined twice. A bullet had entered through the left subclavian. Had she been 60 seconds later, the man would have bled out onto the operating table. She saved him. She always did. That was her job. Except apparently, not everyone here believed that. The security guard stepped closer, eyes narrowing. A buzz-cut white man in his early 40s with a badge that read, "Hail." His voice dropped as he gestured toward the sealed double doors behind her. Housekeeping shouldn't be wandering through trauma response units, especially not VIP. Eden raised one brow slowly, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word. Silence was sharper than any rebuttal. She could still hear the monitor in the trauma room behind her, beeping steady now. The patient was alive. Sedated. Recovering. "I'm gonna need you to hand over your badge," Hale continued, this time reaching for his radio. "Or we'll have to treat this as unauthorized access." That got her attention. Eden turned her head fully, locking eyes with him. Calm. Cold. Precise. "You think I broke into an operating theater?" she asked, her voice quiet but deliberate. Hale crossed his arms. "You're not on any of the posted clearance lists. Dr. Collings runs this floor. He doesn't recognize you. And I saw you enter from the West Freight elevator. That elevator's off limits. I took the freight because the East Wing was sealed off for chemical cleaning," she said, her tone still even. "Standard reroute protocol. And Dr. Collings." She paused, a faint twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Was the one who asked me to take the lead. He panicked when your VIP flatlined." The color drained from Hale's face for a split second, but his posture didn't change. "Identification," he said again, this time tapping the holster on his belt. Eden reached slowly into her coat pocket. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. From it, she pulled a sleek black card with a silver seal embossed in the corner. No photo. No department listed. Just a name, Dr. Eden Monroe, and a line in small print below it, Chief Executive, Surgical Response Unit, U.S. Federal Directive 87G. Hale didn't take it. He didn't touch it. He squinted. "You print that yourself?" And there it was. The line crossed. The moment most people backpedaled from. Eden didn't. Behind them, the double doors hissed open. A nurse leaned out, young, breathless, still wearing trauma goggles. "Dr. Monroe?" "The patient's conscious." Asking for you. That silence was thunderous. Eden didn't look at Hale. She didn't have to. She stepped past him like he didn't exist, snapping off her gloves and sliding them into the red hazard bin on the wall. The doors shut behind her with a soft hiss. Inside the room, it was dim, lights low to ease the patient's transition. An FBI field agent lay on the bed, pale but stable. Oxygen tube, for minor vitals screen humming at his side. His eyes opened as she stepped closer. And then he smiled, small, weak, but certain. "You made it," he rasped. "I always do," Eden replied. A moment passed before he added, "Tell your people they'll need to relocate the safe house. I talked before they sedated me." Eden's expression didn't change. She nodded once, already making a mental note. "I'll escalate it." He exhaled slowly, then chuckled. "Didn't think I'd see you again. Last time was Caracas?" "Beirut," she corrected. Caracas was Bishop. "Right," he murmured, eyes closing again. "You're still terrifying." "I try." She stayed a moment longer. Just long enough to confirm his pressure was stable, oxygen strong, reflex response on cue. Then she turned and walked out. Back in the hallway, Hale was still there, this time flanked by a lieutenant in gray tactical gear and a hospital director in full suit, both clearly summoned post-incident. The director spoke first. "Dr. Monroe. We didn't realize you were here tonight." "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "That's the point." The lieutenant, clearly briefed, didn't speak. He only looked at Hale, then muttered into his comms. Seconds later, another security officer appeared, this time with a clipboard and an empty badge lanyard. "Officer Hale," the lieutenant said coolly. "You're being relieved of duty pending review. Please surrender your equipment and follow internal protocol. Now." Hale's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. She didn't look like, she came from the freight elevator. "No excuses," the lieutenant replied. "And that elevator logs entry. We already pulled access records." Hale's shoulders dropped. 20 minutes, Eden said, watching him. "That's how long it took for you to go from holstering your weapon to handing in your badge." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked away, heels echoing softly against the tile, coat drifting behind her like a trailing flag of quiet war. Dr. Eden Monroe didn't return to her office that night. She didn't need to. Within 15 minutes of leaving the trauma wing, a classified alert had been pushed through her encrypted line. Internal security breach, Category B, triggered by her own access log, ironically. Hale's report, filed just minutes before being escorted out, was flagged for inconsistencies. That was generous. He claimed she entered a restricted floor with a forged ID badge, refused verbal commands, and exhibited aggressive posturing. Aggressive posturing? She had been holding a cup of coffee and an open surgical glove. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nor was the danger. If she hadn't been requested by the federal liaison surgeon on duty, if she hadn't been known by the patient, what Hale filed could have very well stuck. In a different hospital, in a different city, it might have. But this was Eden Monroe. And this wasn't her first time being underestimated. 3 levels below the trauma unit, in a soundproof basement wing known only to high-clearance personnel, Eden entered a biometric-secured room labeled only 4B. Inside, the air was cold and clean, the lights dimmed to preserve energy. A single screen occupied the far wall, glowing soft blue. A woman in her 50s sat at the long table, hair in a tight twist, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. "Ms. Darnell," Eden greeted, setting her comms badge on the table. "Dr. Monroe," the woman replied without warmth. "I've already reviewed the incident. Surveillance footage confirms your timeline." "Footage doesn't always stop headlines," Eden replied flatly. No, Darnell said. But it prevents terminations. That, at least, was true. Darnell gestured toward the tablet in front of her. Would you like to make an official response to the breach report? I'd like it expunged. Darnell raised an eyebrow. Not flagged. Not sealed, Eden said. Expunged. I don't want Hale's assumptions hanging around the record like smoke. I want oxygen. Darnell's lips pressed into a line. I'll see what's possible. You do that, Eden replied. In the meantime, I want to review the facility's staff orientation protocols. If a federal hospital's night staff can't recognize the chief surgical operative, that's a systems failure. Darnell didn't nod. She didn't need to. The message was received. At 2:43 a.m., Eden stepped out of the hospital into the biting Denver air. Her SUV, a federally issued electric Sentry LX, blinked as she approached. She paused before opening the door. Across the rooftop lot, a man was waiting. Not armed. Not aggressive. Just leaning against a Civic with a manila folder tucked under one arm. Don't you people sleep? Eden asked without turning. You know we don't, the man replied. She looked up. It was Special Agent Nico Voss, Internal Affairs Liaison for Interagency Oversight. Ex-Navy. Ex-NSA. Now a federal scalpel, called in when things got messy behind closed doors. You read the Hale report? She asked. I wrote the override, he answered, approaching slowly. If I hadn't been watching from the live feed, you'd probably be filling out paperwork until sunrise. Eden folded her arms. You're not here for small talk. No, Voss admitted. I'm here because Hale wasn't working alone. Her expression didn't change. But her body shifted, just a fraction. A half step more alert. You're sure? I'm not in the habit of guessing, he said, handing her the folder. The patient you operated on, Agent Rivas, was part of an active domestic leak investigation. Internal. We've been watching his unit for weeks. Eden opened the folder. Surveillance stills. Annotated transcripts. A blurry frame of someone holding a burner phone near the hospital back lot. This doesn't tie to me, she said. No, Voss replied. But you were supposed to be elsewhere tonight. You only showed up because Rivas flatlined. That freight elevator route? It wasn't rerouted due to cleaning. That was a misdirection in the access system, planted. Now she was fully still. They tried to keep me out. They did, he confirmed. And Hale was the lever. Eden's fingers tightened on the edge of the folder. Not out of fear. Calculation. I want access to every internal shift log for the last 72 hours, she said. I want comms records from the freight elevator security system, and I want Hale's previous 9 infractions reviewed for potential pattern behavior. You think this is part of a coordinated attempt to discredit you? Voss asked. She gave a half smile. I don't think. I confirm. Later that morning, while the city turned gold under the rising sun and early joggers passed by unaware of anything deeper than their playlists, Dr. Eden Monroe sat at her apartment window with a plain mug of black coffee and a remote connection to the federal internet system. The footage from her incident had already been flagged on 2 internal message boards. Not for misconduct. For training purposes. She smirked. The hospital, desperate for PR control, had pivoted overnight. Instead of silence, they launched a new interdepartmental initiative, Know Your Operatives, framed as a diversity and recognition campaign. Hollow, maybe, but momentum was momentum. What they didn't know was that Eden had already triggered something deeper. 3 younger staff members had reached out anonymously through the secure hospital feedback app. All women of color. All detailing moments where their credentials had been questioned, their competence challenged, their presence unwelcome. She read each one. Twice. She didn't reply. Not yet. But she would. That evening, as Hale sat in an administrative holding office awaiting a disciplinary hearing he wouldn't walk away from clean, a classified audit slipped across a senior director's desk. It had one headline. Incident 77B, Targeted Obstruction of Federal Surgical Command. Underneath, 3 names. One of them circled. Hale. But Eden's wasn't listed. She didn't need to be. Because this time, she didn't just walk away cleared. She walked away rewritten into the protocol. 3 days passed before Eden returned to the hospital. Not as a surgeon. Not as an emergency lead. She didn't even wear her white coat. Just slacks, black boots, and a slate-gray blazer with a tiny silver pin clipped to the lapel, a discreet emblem known only to those cleared above level 7. The same pin that had once been removed from her by mistake in a Paris debrief room, until the French Minister of Health made a personal apology. It wasn't fashion. It was a warning. She stepped through the hospital's south entrance, not the staff one, not the VIP drop-off, and flashed her ID once to the front desk security. The guard didn't question her. In fact, he stood when he saw the name on the badge. Dr. Monroe, he said quietly, nodding. They're expecting you. No one used her first name anymore. A hush followed her down the corridor. The administrative board had been scrambling since Hale's incident hit the wrong inbox, namely, a senator's chief of staff whose nephew happened to be that FBI agent in recovery. What had originally been a quiet report buried under procedural fog was now a simmering scandal. The footage wasn't public, but it was leaking. And worse, it wasn't the footage itself that was damning. It was the expression on Eden's face in every frame, calm, collected, never once raising her voice. It made Hale look unhinged. And now the hospital was spinning. Eden entered the meeting room where 5 people sat around an oval table. 3 were administrators, 1 was legal counsel, and the 5th, Dr. Collins, was the floor supervisor who had originally paged her during the incident. The same one who had later told security he didn't know who she was. He didn't meet her eyes. Dr. Monroe, said the chairwoman, a woman in a cobalt blue pantsuit with decades of protocol experience layered under her tone. Thank you for coming on short notice. I wasn't asked, Eden replied evenly. I was summoned. A beat passed. Legal counsel shifted uncomfortably. We'd like to extend a formal apology for the incident, the chairwoman continued. We understand that your credentials were questioned inappropriately. They weren't questioned, Eden interrupted. They were ignored. She placed a manila envelope on the table. It was thick, sealed, and bore a red tab marked, Protocol Reassignment, Section 4E. What's this? Dr. Collins asked, voice wary. For recommendations, Eden said. Mandatory ID literacy training for all night shift staff. A restructure of the trauma wing access policy. Suspension of all clearance assumption practices. And removal of Hale's permanent security access, retroactively and forward. The counsel opened the envelope, eyes darting across the content. These go beyond internal policy, he muttered. They reflect federal expectation, Eden replied. But we already terminated Hale, Collins cut in. You terminated a problem. Not the system that allowed it. Silence again. The chairwoman exhaled. What are you asking for, doctor? Nothing, Eden said. I'm notifying you. These changes are being implemented. I've submitted them to the Office of Strategic Health Infrastructure and the Department of Federal Oversight. You bypassed our board? No, Eden replied. I outranked it. That afternoon, word spread across the hospital wings like oxygen catching a spark. Nurses whispered about the meeting. Interns talked about the envelope. A few claimed she handed it over in gloves. Others swore it was sealed in biometric tape. It wasn't. But Eden didn't correct them. Legends work better when they write themselves. By 5 p.m., the freight elevator that had triggered the entire debacle was officially locked down for overhaul. By 6, posters were going up in staff lounges with her face on them: "Meet your crisis leads, know your command." A PR move. Thin. But still, it meant something. What no one saw was the quiet war Eden was waging behind the scenes. The patient, Agent Rivas, was recovering, yes. But he hadn't woken up again. Not fully. Not enough to confirm what Eden needed, that his intel leak had originated inside the hospital. So Eden turned to her own resources. She activated Protocol 9B, post-incident digital sweep. 3 scrubbed staff IDs from the past 6 months. 2 former janitorial hires with expired federal clearances. 1 night shift tech who had been removed for inappropriate access to surgical logs. On paper, none of them connected. But the algorithm Eden had built for one of her DC contracts flagged a time match. For minutes after Rivas was admitted, a secure storage lock had been accessed via a mirrored ID. That meant someone had cloned clearance. And that someone hadn't expected Eden Monroe to walk into the wrong wing at the right time. She leaned back in her chair in her private quarters, the lights low, her fingers tapping against her knee. There were 2 ways this could go. She could report the breach to Internal Affairs now. Or, she could let the hospital believe their fixes had fixed everything, while she followed the trail herself. She chose the second. Eden never rushed. Not when hunting. Late that night, Eden parked her SUV outside a quiet government annex building on the edge of the city. It was an unmarked structure, no signs, just a steel security box and a biometric panel. She placed her hand on the reader. It beeped once, then twice. Inside, in a room that smelled of coffee, code, and cold air, Agent Voss was already waiting. "You're early," he said. "You're late," Eden replied. They exchanged data. Nothing verbal for the first few minutes, just files, logs, clearance scans. Then Voss finally spoke. The ID that accessed the lockbox in Trauma Wing 3 wasn't cloned from a hospital staffer. It was cloned from a federal agency badge. Someone inside the bureau. Eden closed the file slowly. How deep? We don't know yet. But the person who made the clone, whoever they are, they're targeting federal operatives. Using hospitals as cover. Exactly. She stood. "This isn't about Rivas," she said. "It never was. It's about all of us." Voss didn't answer. But his eyes told her everything. Outside, the wind picked up. Cold and dry. Denver's skyline blinked in the dark like a city unaware of the network running beneath its feet. Eden Monroe stood at the curb, staring out at the buildings she had once trusted. A janitor. That's what Hale had called her. She smiled faintly. Not with amusement. With resolve. Because now she knew what floor they were really trying to lock her out of. Not the trauma wing. Not the elevator. The truth. Eden Monroe didn't sleep the night she discovered the badge was cloned from a bureau ID. She didn't need rest. Not yet. What she needed was verification, and then, accountability. By sunrise, her laptop was connected to 3 closed-loop systems, one routed through an internal hospital server still vulnerable from a patch that hadn't been deployed, one through a Homeland Security contractor database she helped design, and the third, a ghost line that didn't technically exist. She hadn't used it in 5 years. Didn't mean she'd forgotten the password. Inside the encrypted channel, she pulled up a stream of activity logs linked to internal facility accesses across 8 major cities, including DC, Dallas, and San Diego. She wasn't looking for names, just patterns. In under 10 minutes, she found one, a mirrored access sequence that trailed a string of emergency interventions all of them involving high-clearance operatives who later reported missing or compromised files. The only constant in the logs? Each incident happened in a facility that had adopted the same third-party contractor for its ID verification systems. And one of the hospitals on the list was hers. By 9:14 a.m., she was in the federal agency building again, this time not with Voss, but someone she hadn't worked with in years, Director Camille St. James. Camille didn't do courtesies. She also didn't like being summoned. But when Eden dropped her name on a secure line at 3 a.m., she came. "Let me get this straight," Camille said, leaning against the window of the ops floor. "You think someone embedded a fake identity matrix into the system from the outside? That they piggybacked off our own software?" "I don't think," Eden said. "I have the logs." She slid the drive across the table. Camille plugged it into a secured port, and the screen bloomed with lines of time-stamped activity. Eden had marked each log with red tags. They used hospitals as neutral ground, Eden explained. Places where security is expected, but not monitored like embassies or safehouses. That's how they hid the badge clones. No one questions a janitor or a low-ranking tech in a trauma wing, not when there's blood on the floor. Camille scrolled through the entries. Her face hardened. How many people know this? Right now? Eden said. Just me. And now you. A long silence stretched between them. Then Camille stood straight, her voice shifting from suspicion to calculation. I want a task force. Small. Off books. I'll authorize the resources through our covert recovery fund. Eden nodded once. I already have names. Of course she did. But what Eden didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that her name was already circulating somewhere else. Not in security logs. In smear documents. At 11:07 a.m., a forged incident report was anonymously submitted to an internal ethics panel. It claimed that Eden had overstepped her authority during a previous intervention in Atlanta. The language was precise. Too precise. As if copied from real disciplinary files and retrofitted to her context. The claim, Eden had bypassed a chain of command, compromised a patient's privacy, and had historical markers of behavioral volatility. The implication, she was brilliant, but unstable. Exceptional, but dangerous. Just enough to raise a flag. Just enough to make someone pause. And just like that, a whisper campaign began. At 3:32 p.m., she received her first call. Blocked number. Distorted voice. You should step back from this, the caller said. This doesn't concern you anymore. Eden was silent for 2 beats. Then she spoke, calm and sharp. If I'm getting calls like this, it concerns me more than ever. The line went dead. She traced the ping. It was routed through a VPN chain in Brazil, but the origin IP matched a drop point in Kansas City, an abandoned federal courier site once used during a relocation program in the 90s. She made a note. Tucked it away. She didn't respond with threats. She responded with records. 2 hours later, the smear reached the desk of Dr. Lucien Fairbanks, the temporary medical director now assigned to oversee the hospital's transition after Hale's exit. He had only been there 6 days, but he was a procedural purist, a man who followed forms before facts. He scheduled a routine inquiry into Eden's clearance. Discreet. Just enough to imply due diligence. But Eden wasn't naive. She intercepted the memo before it hit the chain. Instead of reacting, she walked into his office at 7:02 p.m. sharp. You want to audit me, she said, standing while he remained seated. I want to verify, he replied. It's standard. She stepped forward, pulled a leather-bound folder from her bag, and placed it flat on the desk. This is my file. Complete. Unredacted. With 4 letters of confirmation from federal division leads, 3 performance reports marked critical asset, and a commendation from the Joint Medical Operations Command. I included a photo of the patient I saved this week. He bled on my hands while your night shift debated whether I was real. Fairbanks didn't speak. Open it, she said. He did. Slowly. With both hands. Inside, clipped to the first page, was a thumb drive. Watch that footage, Eden said. Then decide if you want to keep your job. She turned, heels clicking. By midnight, she received another message. Not a threat. A single sentence. They tried it with you because they thought your identity was disposable. It came from a nurse in Atlanta she hadn't seen in 3 years. One of the women who had once trained under her. The message had no emoji, no name, just words. But it struck harder than any security breach. Because that was the truth. They didn't just try to erase her credentials. They tried to erase her credibility. And they failed. Because Eden Monroe didn't fight like they expected. She didn't yell. She didn't demand. She documented. She traced. She prepared her case while they prepared her funeral. And now? Now she was the one with the footage. The files. The voice. The access. And the names. Eden Monroe had been silent for 2 days. To the board, to the press, to the whispers circulating among the medical elite, she said nothing. But silence wasn't surrender. Silence was strategy. While the smear campaign fizzled under the weight of verified credentials and first-hand footage, Eden had turned inward. Into archives, into private channels, into the dark spaces between bureaucracies where names were traded like currency and records were erased with the right login. Because this wasn't just about one hospital anymore. It wasn't even about her. It was about a system that knew her name only when it needed her hands, her clearance, her calm under fire, and forgot all of it the second she challenged its order. At 4:27 a.m., inside an undisclosed federal cybersecurity bunker near Boulder, Colorado, Eden sat across from a team of analysts reviewing what she'd pieced together. 12 incidents. 7 cities. 3 agencies compromised. All the same pattern: critical operative enters a medical facility, usually mid-transport or under emergency directive. A routine miscommunication delays care. Access is denied. The wrong person intervenes. And just like that, records disappear, assets vanish, and in at least 2 cases, operatives never walked out. It wasn't coincidence. It was design. They're hitting us at our most vulnerable point, Eden said, pointing to a map glowing on the wall. Not with weapons. With doubt. Delay. Discredit. They're counting on us not believing our own, Voss added, flipping through the printed logs Eden had brought. One of the techs leaned forward. If we trace this deeper, if the mirrored badge you flagged is part of a larger network, we're going to need DOJ involvement. No, Eden said. Not yet. We don't notify the Department of Justice until we know how many of their people are already compromised. That landed heavy. Everyone in the room understood the implication. You don't fight a ghost in front of mirrors. You turn off the lights and wait for it to blink first. By midday, Eden was back in Denver, walking through the lobby of the hospital that had once questioned her right to exist in her own job. The posters were still up. Smiling faces, bold letters. Recognize every rank. She didn't look at them. She went straight to the trauma floor. The woman at the desk, mid-20s, knew, froze as Eden approached. But instead of questioning her, she stood up, opened the door without a word, and said quietly, "Thank you for coming back." Progress. Inside, Agent Rivas was sitting upright now. Bruised, but alert. His voice was stronger than before. "You figured it out, didn't you?" he asked as she pulled up a chair beside his bed. I'm close, she replied. But I need your version. He blinked slowly, then nodded. The moment I walked into that hospital, I knew something was wrong, he said. It was in the way they looked at my badge. Not like they were surprised. Like they were rehearsing. Eden listened carefully. They stalled me, he continued. Asked for verification they already had. Then someone from security asked if I was supposed to be in that wing. I said I'd been rerouted by command. But he didn't buy it. He said my ID was flagged. Flagged by who? Eden asked. Didn't say. Just that he was following protocol. That's when I texted Keen. Then everything went black. She nodded once, mentally logging the detail. You remember the officer's name? She asked. Not clearly, he said. But he had a scar on his chin. Talked like he was ex-military, but his posture was off. Too stiff. Eden stood. That's enough. Enough to what? Rivas asked. To bury a career, she said. Maybe more. Back in her vehicle, Eden opened her encrypted tablet and cross-checked security personnel logs from that night against former armed services discharge records. It took 3 filters before she found him. Derek Langford. Dishonorably discharged in 2015 for unauthorized access to restricted facilities. Resurfaced in private security 2 years later. Then again, quietly, on a federal subcontractor list tied to badge authentication support. She smiled without warmth. The system hadn't just forgotten her rank. It had recycled someone else's disgrace and handed them a position of control. At 7:03 p.m., she walked into a council debrief. Not to speak. To watch. Langford sat near the end of the long table, dressed in the crisp uniform of private security. Clean-shaven. Calm. Unbothered. Until he saw her. She didn't blink. He did. The chairwoman began the meeting with formalities. Boring. Safe. Until she turned to Eden and asked, Dr. Monroe, would you like to share your concerns? Eden stepped forward. No, she said. I'd like to share my evidence. She placed a hard drive on the table. No theatrics. No dramatic speech. On this drive is a complete timeline of the breach that endangered Agent Rivas. It includes access logs, badge authentication data, a forged ID trail, and audio surveillance that identifies Mr. Langford as a contributing party. Gasps. Some covered. Some not. Langford stood up, knocking his chair over. This is a setup. No, Eden cut in, this is a reckoning. The council moved fast. 2 security officers entered before Langford could exit. He didn't resist. He knew it was over. The hospital board didn't issue a press release. They didn't need to. By morning, the footage of the security escort, quiet, deliberate, undeniable, was leaked through internal whistleblower channels. It hit Twitter, then Reddit, then 3 major outlets. The story exploded. Security breach at Federal Medical Center exposed by doctor once detained as imposter. They called her the woman who wouldn't flinch. The doctor who didn't raise her voice, just her facts. The one who turned a smear into a mirror. Eden didn't comment. She didn't need to. The system had remembered her now. Not just her rank. Her name. 2 weeks after Derek Langford was escorted off federal property in handcuffs, Eden Monroe stood alone in the same hallway where she'd been stopped, interrogated, and nearly arrested. This time, no one questioned her. No one asked for ID. The nameplate beside the trauma wing now read, Dr. Eden Monroe, Strategic Lead, Emergency Surgical Intelligence Division. The title wasn't new. But for the first time, it was public. Not tucked inside redacted dossiers or buried beneath clearance codes. Her identity was no longer a thing to be confirmed behind closed doors. It was on the wall. Visible. Permanent. The aftermath moved swiftly. Faster than anyone expected. Faster than the system was prepared for. Following Eden's evidence drop, 5 other hospitals across the country initiated internal reviews of their private security vendors. 3 found inconsistencies. 1 found 2 forged employee files dated back nearly 4 years. A nationwide audit followed. The Office of Federal Medical Oversight sent a directive to all associated hospitals and trauma facilities: retrain, restructure, verify. No exceptions. No delays. The policy that Eden drafted in under 48 hours, Code Monroe, became required reading across government-supported medical facilities. And while press outlets tried to track her down for interviews, for comment, for soundbites, they found nothing. Eden didn't go on TV. Didn't pose for photos. Didn't tweet. She just kept showing up for work. Like she always had. Inside the break room on level 5, a junior nurse pinned up a quote from her on the wall. Eden hadn't even known she'd said it aloud. Someone must have overheard her during the hearings. If they can't see your rank, make sure they can feel it. It stayed there for weeks. No one touched it. One morning, an unmarked envelope slid under her office door. Inside, a folded sheet of lined notebook paper. Handwritten, in block letters. Dr. Monroe. I'm a third-year medical student. I'm the only black woman in my program. Last month, I almost dropped out. Then I read about what you did. Now I know I can stay. You didn't ask to be seen. You made them see you anyway. Thank you for not disappearing. J.M. Eden held the letter in both hands. She didn't frame it. She didn't file it. She kept it in her pocket. Outside the hospital, the public buzz began to die down. Reporters moved on to the next crisis. Twitter timelines shifted. Headlines faded. But inside small offices and training rooms, Eden's story lived on. At one VA hospital in Virginia, a retired sergeant held a short seminar for new hires. He opened with, "What happened to Dr. Eden Monroe was not a scandal. It was a mirror. And the question is, what are you going to do when someone like her walks through your door?" At a community college in Chicago, a professor paused his ethics lecture and played the surveillance footage. His students watched Eden calmly hand over her badge, only to be dismissed, disrespected, disbelieved. Then they watched as she made one phone call, and the camera angle flipped. Authority shifted. Power reversed. No narration was needed. The images spoke for themselves. One night, long after the building had emptied, Eden sat in her office with a single lamp on. Her desk was bare except for a leather-bound notebook and her encrypted device. Her eyes were tired, but her hands were steady. She opened the notebook and wrote 3 words on the first line of a blank page. It didn't end. She paused. Then added. It evolved. Outside her window, Denver's skyline blinked soft in the dark, its glow a quiet pulse of motion and memory. She remembered everything. The accusation. The cuffs. The silence. The click of her own heels walking away from it all. She didn't feel anger anymore. Just clarity. They hadn't tried to erase her name. Not really. They tried to overwrite it. Replace it. Fold it into a file where it wouldn't echo. But Eden Monroe had made sure that echo became a signal. And now? Now it was everywhere. On every badge. In every training video. In the memory of every staff member who once looked at a woman in a white coat and saw a threat instead of a surgeon. And in the quiet resolve of every young professional who stood a little taller after hearing her story. She didn't need the world to remember her name. She just needed it to remember. There are names you cannot erase. Not because they are printed in bold, but because they are spoken in silence, passed from one survivor to another, written into the structure of reform, not in ink, but in change.